Starting to see
All right.
That's exciting.
Okay. It's 6 o'clock. We will call the village board trustees to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, John, you got a lot of blowback coming out of there.
Turn up the radio.
Yeah, it's gonna be kind of hard with being in the middle of an airport.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, roll call, please, Sherry.
Feeney,
Here.
Maloney,
Here.
Sparks,
Here.
John,
Here.
Zagami,
Here.
Ziegler,
Here.
Okay, public comments. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to make any comments, anything from the public at all? Hearing none. Move on to item number 4, minutes from previous board meeting. Approval minutes from the February 17th, 2020 Board of Trustees.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jean, second by Feeney. On the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes carried. Reports, minutes from boards, committees, and commissions. I had a discussion with Keith earlier in the week about these specifically. You know, we have the reports go in there, but generally for the safety, the public safety entities, both for Safer and Everest Metro, really the feedback comes back a long time. The minutes are few and far between, the meetings are. So I attached a spreadsheet from our Safer board meeting that we had this past Wednesday. And I think it's important that people that are on the public safety committees provide some feedback so it's a little more timely for the board. So we're going to start doing this going forward for both Safer and EMPD. The meeting that we had Wednesday night was a joint meeting with the Safer board and with the Safer Fire Commission. And they had a presentation from Dean Dietrich, from Dietrich Vanderwall. It kind of went through roles and responsibilities for the two committees. I think there had been some confusion and some issues in the past. One of them included the fact that the Safer board really had no input on or any part of doing the evaluation for the fire chief. So we had a long discussion on that. The attorneys gave some input on that. So the Safer board, for the attorneys, should be the ones that start doing that. So that was one thing that came out of that meeting. The other thing that was on the agenda for the Safer board was contracts for the outside entities that Safer serves. So the spreadsheet that you have attached shows the 7 entities that Safer serves. I think the one village, and I think the rest are townships. And the Deputy Chief Finke put together this spreadsheet and basically took actual numbers from 2019 together, showing all the revenues collected from these contracts. So that include the standby fees, admin fees, and the EMS revenue, what was billed for the medical billing portion, and which brought in a total of $306,463 and change. They took the amount of calls, which I believe was 459 calls is what it equated to in these 7 municipalities. And they said the total revenue that they received per call based on their analysis was $667.68. They then put on the very bottom of that spreadsheet, you'll see that they said it cost Safer $851 to provide those calls. I'm not sure if the data is in the analysis was probably as maybe succinct as it could be. So I'm not sure if those numbers are accurate, but if those numbers are accurate, basically that means that the revenue, the taxpayers are kind of subsidizing these outside contracts. One of the things I had asked at the previous Safer board meeting was that I wanted to see a cost-benefit analysis for all these contracts to make sure that we are at minimum covering our expenses. So obviously this is a concern because if our taxpayers and Rip Mountain taxpayers collectively are subsidizing that roughly $84,000, I don't think that's appropriate. So that's something that we'll be working on at the Safer board in upcoming meetings. So I just want to share that, and then when we have Everest Metro Joint Finance, we'll be doing the same thing. So if you have any questions on things that are going on in the interim, please ask one of, Mark and I are on the Safer Board. Mark, I, and Nate are on Everest Metro. So if any of the trustees have questions or concerns and stuff that's going on, or just want to know what's going on and don't attend a meeting, like I say, instead of waiting a couple months until you see minutes, feel free to ask us and we'll try to keep the board updated. Okay, any questions at all? Okay. We'll be looking for an acknowledgement for the reports, items 5 through 16.
Move to acknowledge.
Motion by Feeney, second by Maloney. On the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Reports from departments, number 17.
John said aye.
Administrator Keith.
Just a couple of things, beyond, or in addition to my report, or update from my report. I had, I think mistakenly indicated that the special assessment hearing for the Weston Elementary School neighborhood was going to be March 10th. And I apologize, that's supposed to be Thursday, March 12th, which would be next a week from Thursday. I also talked with John Wallenkamp and Greg Johnson. John, of course, from CUNY, Greg Johnson from Ellers, about coordinating to be present for a open house for our municipal facilities planning. And March 19th is the date that they can both be here, so we're going to be planning for a special meeting that day. We'll have walkthroughs, some, I guess, stations to kind of highlight some of the issues we're having with this facility and so forth, and some of the history. And then both of them will be given a presentation during the time. We're tentatively scheduling this between 5 and 8 o'clock. So just an informational item, I guess, mainly. And then as far as trying to set up a meeting of local municipal leaders on possible partnerships, the date that has gotten the most, I guess, agreement for schedules was March 11th at 2:30. That's a Wednesday. So I guess I'll send out email or a calendar invite to say that that's the date.
On both of those? On Thursday too, the 19th?
Yes, that'll
Can you
go
do
to
that
our board
Yeah.
and to this board,
Okay.
all
Good.
public officials here, I guess.
Okay.
So, and I guess unless you have any other questions, that's all I have for now.
Any questions for Keith? Clerks, Sherry, I know you don't report. You have anything you want to add?
Just that at the last election in February, we had 2,226 voters. So that was about 27% of our registered voters, and that's about what we would have for a turnout during an April election.
too.
So that was a pretty good turnout for a primary election.
Yeah. Okay, questions for Sherry? Finance, Jess, you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay, questions for Jess? Fire EMS, not here tonight. Parks and Rec, anything, Sean?
I don't have a report in the packet, but if you have any questions.
No, hearing none. Planning Development, Jen?
I have nothing to add.
Okay, anything for John? Police, not here. Public Works, Michael, anything?
I guess, it'd be in March, we, I guess, monthly do our salt inventory, and this year we are about 40 tons less than we used last winter at this point, so we're, I guess, doing a little, slightly better, and so hopefully the weather has changed and we don't have to use much more, and we ended up being, I guess, just slightly below average for this winter season if we're not using more salt, so.
Watch, we're gonna get hit with a big.
I know, I had to say something.
You jinxed it.
You should have said you barely have enough left.
Kind of like these last couple of weekends. Keep them like that, we're good. All right, any questions for Mike?
How many, if we're 40 tons lower, how much salt have we actually used this winter?
About 2,300 tons.
Oofta.
So our shed holds about 3,200 tons. In a given year, we use 75% of what we have. So right now we're at 72.5%. So,
Wow.
or 2003 and 20.
All right, thanks, Michael. Technology, Nate's not here, no report. Consent agenda. Does anybody want anything pulled out for consideration? Okay, I'll be looking for a motion to approve items 27 to 29.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Maloney, second by Feeney. On the question? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Ordinance, we have nothing. Resolutions, nothing. Old business. Item number 31, reduce receivable related to the safer cash deficit by 1/5.
So I called the auditor and I explained to him the concern from the finance committee, and his response was he's focusing more on the original intention when we set it up as a receivable. The board agreed to do that. And then also he looked at the agreement between the two boards, which kind of, that sets the tone of, yes, it's okay to do it over the 5 years. One way to look at it is, say for if you go to an engineering firm and they spend more money than what the original contract was, they don't necessarily, you're not gonna go and expense that right away, even though they're not. Eventually it will catch up with you, and that's kind of how we need to kind of look at it, is it was an agreement for that year, and we paid the amount required for that year, and now they're setting up a receivable, and the auditor is gonna look at it as an agreement between the two municipalities to pay it over 5 years, so.
Okay. Yeah, and this was tabled last month to this meeting so she could touch base with the auditor, so we have our question asked. So we're looking for a motion on that?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve? Okay, motion by Maloney, second by Jean. On the question? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. New business, item number 32, recommendation to develop a 3-year contract with the YMCA for Weston Aquatic Center Management. Keith or Sean, who's taking this one?
Either one of us, I guess.
Okay.
Sean probably has more of the detail.
Yep, so I guess just to go back to the last Monday's meeting, the Park and Rec Committee did recommend moving forward with a 3-year contract with YMCA. We also presented it to the HR committee, just so they were aware of where we stood as far as the process. I think I covered a lot of the detail as far as who we talked to, who we met with, the options that we looked at. And as far as our recommendation also was the YMCA, because we felt like they were outfitted to take over the management the best. They're looking obviously long-term right off the bat for future management and, for a good long relationship. So currently they have like 150 lifeguards on staff, but they're also looking to hire to make sure that there's no shortages in covering ours. And they're looking basically to take over the entire management of the facility as far as day-to-day operations, hiring, staffing, stuff like that, where the village would still retain the maintenance portion of the pool, so we'd still be monitoring the water, dealing with maintenance, repairs, stuff like that. So if there's something that I didn't put in the RFCs or we didn't put in the RFCs, feel free to ask me questions on it.
Would Rothschild or Schofield be heading in the same direction for theirs?
They may. I know they're kind of going year to year on their management right now, and they're looking for the future too. So as far as management of their facility, and currently there's a Y employee that manages the facility for them. So I mean, they already have tied to the YMCA to some extent. So I'm sure it'll be part of their discussions as they move forward as far as managing their facilities too.
Move to approve. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, excuse me. Still, we're gonna have somebody oversee from the village, the operation, right?
Well, we'll still have obviously day-to-day communication with them, and there'll still be an agreement or a contract that'll be drafted basically based off of your recommendation tonight if we are moving forward. And then in that contract, we'll be covering some of the details that the HR committee brought up and the Park and Rec committee, which was, HR was making sure that we still had some oversight, that we draft in the document exactly what we're expecting them to do. So, there's no question on who's doing what. And Park and Rec Committee also had a recommendation that, that developing programs in the future, that we still have input. It's not just them saying, well, this is what we're doing. So, but through our initial discussions, like this year, swim lessons, they're still village swim lessons. So registration's still through the village, still our costs, we're setting the price, and stuff like that. And that's something that we could discuss in the future if we decided to change it. But everything right now is staying as it is currently.
I see that the YMCA did have a short written proposal versus.
They didn't. I actually just drafted that.
Oh, okay.
If you read in the RFC, I stated that it was
verbal.
just through discussions verbally, and then just for purposes of the packet, I wanted to make sure that there was some of the items that we discussed down so you could see it.
Okay.
I didn't see a name of the liaison from the village. Is that someplace I missed?
Of the what, of the
Who's the
liaison?
liaison from the village?
Well, I'm the one that's had the bulk of the communication with them.
So your name is there in the contract? They identified, they know?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be my name, but it'll be specific positions, I'm sure. Keith is part of the discussion too, so I guess it's to be determined who you would want to have the bulk of the conversation with, or if it's just, multiple people. If we just say designee from the village or something like that, because a lot of times we don't like to put specific people, because as we know, things change, and you don't want just one person designated as the point person for the discussion. So I would think, say, village administrator, parks director, whoever it is, put it in there like that.
Well, they should know who to communicate, really. We should direct somebody, specifically so they can communicate with us. And that person, they should know who he is.
Yeah.
And it could be village administrator, yes, but somebody should be there as a liaison so they can pick up the phone and say, okay, Mr. Donna, this is the problem we have.
Yeah, and I guess it would be me, because I would be able to designate, which issue it is and which department might be involved in it, stuff like that.
So you're looking for a motion just to draft the agreement and bring that back?
Right, the agreement will come back before the village board, and more likely, it'll probably go to Park and Rec Committee at the end of March before it would come back to the board, probably the first meeting in April.
What made the YMCA more attractive than Marathon County?
Just because of their overall oversight of the facility. I mean, they're looking to take over everything, where Marathon County wanted to have less involvement at this point. They were really just trying to help the village out initially that first year, and then maybe expand future discussions. But they're really only addition of a staff member that they were looking at was adding a manager that would oversee the facility, and then their rec director was going to oversee them. So their involvement would have been minimal compared to the YMCA, where they're looking to staff the facility, pretty much direct oversight of it, and then to the extent of how they're going to, track costs and help manage the facility for efficiency, future programming, stuff like that, down the road. So
The Parks and Rec Committee, when we were talking about this, they also felt that the YMCA would have the potential to have the ability and capacity to grow the programs versus the Marathon County's Parks and Recreation Department, who would actually be cutting services rather than growing and expanding our services. And we want to make sure that our pool is actually obviously attractive to the other to individuals in the surrounding area here as well.
What would the pay difference for the lifeguards be between the YMCA and Marathon County?
Well, the lifeguards will be paid the wages that we have set.
Okay,
They will not be paid what the Y has set.
okay,
So that's part of our discussion, was that whatever our wage scale is, that's what they will be paid. Currently, lifeguards at the YMCA make $10 an hour, starting pay. Ours is $10.50. Marathon County, like I said, the employees were still gonna be ours, so they would have been paid what we were, also.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but we're actually going to be saving money after.
Initially, yeah, like, this first year might be status quo, but down the road, we should be saving money based on their proposal.
We had a motion, Maloney, to approve drafting the contract. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jean. Anything else on the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 33, contract amendment with JSD Professional Services for Camp Phillips Center wetland permit process. It's you, Keith.
Yes, this is an item that we had, I think on our agenda late in January. So it was brought back with some additional backup and detail relative to the hours and staff time that JSD had devoted to the wetland application permit, or wetland permit application, I'm sorry. So the amount being requested actually for reimbursement is 85% of the total of $35,000. I guess it's your pleasure whether to just approve it to that amount or to approve the entire request to a maximum of $35,000.
Is that already spent that, or that's going to be a spend that?
It would be the net difference between the 35,000 and 20, so essentially 5,250 would still be eligible to be billed if we approve the 35,000. If you only approve the request to this point, it would be 29,750.
This is they bill already
They've
21,000.
already expended, yes.
And we have support?
I'm sorry,
We have support?
as far as.
We have support that pertains to the billing?
Yes,
We do.
yes, it
Okay.
should be attached to the packet. actually.
And then, when is the public hearing? Is there going to be a public hearing yet?
I think,
Maybe that would be contingent on the discussion to follow. I guess if you prefer, we could defer any action on this till after the presentation.
I'd actually like to make a motion to defer action until after the presentation. I think that we should be a little more informed.
okay, we have a motion to defer. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to defer this to following item number 34. On the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will re-bring this up after item
Who
number
made the
34.
second? Was it?
I
John.
Okay, thank you.
And John, yes, that also.
Okay, item number 34, Forward Development Group referencing Camp Phillips Center project, discussion and possible action by the Board of Trustees regarding Camp Phillips Center presentation by Forward Development Group. Gentlemen, Ron. You just state your name and address for the record, please.
Will do. Ron Hinchy with Forward Development Group. We're located at 161 Horizon Drive in Verona, Wisconsin. I have Margaret Blum with us this evening, and then Justin Frame from JSD is here as well, and will contribute to the presentation that we have for you. Can you hear me just fine?
Yep.
Yep.
For some reason, I can't hear
John, can you hear
myself
me?
very well.
John, can you hear him? Yep, okay.
Okay. You know, first of all, let me start. This presentation this evening is really flowed from a meeting that we had with staff in late November, and then continuing conversations in January to bring an update to you on the Camp Phillips project. And I first want to state on behalf of Forward Development Group, who's the developer, you know, we appreciate all of the efforts and time and energy and dollars that you have expended on behalf of this project. And we've worked diligently to complete tasks that are necessary to move this forward. And I intend to bring you up to date on that, but we value our communications, our relationship that we've had with the village, and are working to try to find ways to continue to move forward in a positive way, because things are currently not moving as we had originally anticipated. So I want to bring you up to date on that. We have a short presentation. More importantly, I want to make sure that we get all of your questions answered, so don't hesitate to ask. If I'm not being specific enough to clarify, we'll do our best to do kind of a high-level view of where we're at, what got us here, and what we're recommending that we do as we go forward. So there's really 4 sections to our presentation. I'm going to start with a brief project history, background, kind of where we started, what got us to a certain point of moving forward, then how the project has evolved since then, what the current status is, and what our recommendation is, and how we go from here, okay? And who, in terms of the slides here, who's, Sean, you're
Right here,
responsible
yep.
there? Okay, thank you. Let's, if you could, go to the next slide for me. A little history and background. What I'd like to highlight is the first number on the first date on the project timeline. February of 2015. We went back into our records, and we had discussions earlier than that, but really the first dollars that FDG spent on this project were posted in February of 2015. And we've been talking with you earlier than that. So as we sit here today, in March of 2020, we've been working to get this project, as it was originally visualized, approved. And to date, as you know, we've been unsuccessful in doing that. So I want to talk a little bit about, before I jump into the details, Sean, if you could go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about timing and stuff like that. When you start a project of this magnitude, this is different than if I'm coming to you as a village and I have a 40-unit multifamily I want to build on a parcel within the village, or I have a small little retail center or office or whatever it is. That has a vision involved on behalf of the individuals who wants to build a single property. This is actually a 160-acre development, and really have another 160 acres to the east that's designed to be industrial. It's a large area, and to really properly plan for and design it, you first have to visualize it. You have to create a vision, and that's what we did in working with your staff. And I want to talk more about that later on, but of course, what is a vision? Really, if we're trying to bring the users to this project that we planned on bringing to it, which are very large, sophisticated retailers, you've got to have a story to sell. You have to have an idea of what it's going to feel like. And this diagram and the words that are on there indicate what that feel has to be. It has to be colorful, energizing, compelling, inspiring. And as we created this vision and came to you and talked about it, what you can really visualize is a hustling, bustling retail center where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals coming every day and even more on a weekend, and coming to the retail center and spending the day there, purchasing what they need for their families, stopping at coffee shops, having lunch at places of excellent food, and having an entertainment area that they can go to and entertain. It was a vibrant, compelling vision that we created for this area. And in and amongst all these details, that gets forgotten sometimes, that vision that was created. And ultimately, we end up looking at blocks on paper and saying, hey, these different blocks, what do they represent? But what needs to be considered when you're looking at that is that vision that was created. And a great vision was created for this 160 acres called Camp Phillips. And if you go to the next slide, then to kind of what are the elements of a vision, well, what it does is it attracts commitment and it energizes people. You need to have that energy within the community and within the individuals that are going to ultimately have businesses there. If it's good, if it's a community vision, it creates meaning in people's lives. It's not just a place that you have and go to and does nothing but allows you to purchase a piece of lumber or some groceries or whatever it is. It's a meaningful, it establishes a standard of excellence. Other people want to model it. They want to do the same thing that you've done because of the job that you did. And it bridges the present with the future. Meaning it's the future of the village of Weston and a hub in the community. And what gets lost in a lot of what I'm going to go to in a little bit is that vision that was created and approved by maybe some of you in this room, or maybe some of you are new to the process and are available or aware of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but not integral to the time. But as we've gone on, we lose sight of that, and it's important to not lose sight of it, even if ultimately the end result that I'm going to tell you in a little bit is that we don't think you should move forward with this vision. It should not be part of your plans any longer, because it's just not feasible to build it to the way it was visualized. But not due to lack of effort on the part of anybody in this room, including ourselves. And sometimes you come upon obstacles that ultimately create a situation that you can't move forward, to nobody's fault. They just exist, and we've done our best. But the end result is, and it's always important to know the end result, is that we recommended to staff in December that you not move forward with this vision in the way that it was laid out for the benefit of the village and for the benefit of ourselves. Now, let me go into a little detail as to why. Okay. So I'd like to, Sean, go back to the timeline if you could. So here's what happened. In February 2015, as we first started to work on it and this vision was created, it took us 18 months from February of 2015 to work with staff to figure out what this vision would look like and to ultimately make a recommendation on the plan for what's referred to as Camp Phillips, okay? Now, as part of creating that village, we do a lot of research and study. And what are the needs in the community? What are the needs in the wider regional community? In this particular case, there's a retail study that was done actually by yourselves prior to us getting involved and include a 100-mile radius of what the needs were. And we take all of that and create the vision. And ultimately then, all of that came together, and it was really the important date of August of 2016, which was 18 months later, of when we presented to you a plan, a comprehensive plan with our piece in there of what we recommended that you consider to move forward. It goes through the process of what happened from that date of October 2016 forward, and ultimately in June of 2018, you came into agreement with a memorandum of understanding with ourselves and yourselves, and that's what really kind of then moved this project forward. And in June of 2018 is really the key date of when then we said, all right, let's, now that the plan is approved, let's try to get this thing permitted and move it forward. Okay, if you go to the next slide, then, I'm sorry, right there. This is the plan, that's the visual. If you take a look at that diagram there that is blocks on the paper, it puts in schematic or, diagram form, two-dimensional form, what that vision was for this retail center. Now, as you see, the first thing that needed to be done, which we knew was a big issue back then, is we needed to get the wetland fill permit issued. So September, October of 2018 was when we were working to apply and get that wetland fill permit issued. The concept at the time was we were going to get a significant portion of the wetlands mitigated, and so we had great plans for basically developing on the majority of the site. Okay? As we sit here today, that first step is still not accomplished. And based on what has been done, and Justin's going to come up here in a little bit and talk to you in detail so you can have any of your detailed questions answered, we just cannot get over this hurdle. We can't find a way to get the DNR to accept issuing of a permit for the greater concept plan. They're wanting individual user permits to be issued, and that is something that just is not feasible and cannot be accomplished. So ultimately, we sit here almost 2 years later with no ability to move past square one because of the wetland piece. I'm going to show you an additional phase in a second. We've tried to work around, we've tried to do different things, and ultimately none of those have satisfied the DNR, and we're getting to a point where in working to try to avoid the wetlands is not making the project economically feasible, is not allowing us to carry out the vision in a way that it makes sense. But that's the key issue. From there, a number of other issues then have fallen out that I'll talk about in a little bit. Our goal was to get that done in September, October 2018, get our land entitlements, which relate to zoning and use and all of those, by October, to start the land closings in late 2018, such that we could be doing our demolition, land clearing, and late 2018, early 2019, have sites ready in late 2019, we'd be starting in construction here in 2020. Obviously, none of those are even relevant if we can't get past the first one. Okay. So that's the biggest challenge. So if you go to the next slide, then what it just kind of lays out some of the magnitude of the issues that we've been dealing with. If you take a look at that original phase, when you have thousands of cars of traffic coming in, and we did traffic impact analyses and created significant entrance and turn lanes and all of this, it was a $50 million development overall, and the developer was needing to contribute about $32.5 million. We're looking for TIF to the extent of $27 million for off-site improvements, which included bridge construction, intersections, other things, and there's also an on-site need of about $9 million. It's a large project with many complex components and significant financial ramifications. And based on that, it was to support that significant increment of tax base was needed in order to prove it, make it work economically. And actually, at this level, it did work economically. Your consultant, who was Ellers, had reviewed that, said that basically the dollars that were there, I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, but it worked economically. Okay, so it made sense to forward, assuming we'd be able to mitigate the wetlands. Okay. Ultimately, then, as we got through the process, if you go to the next slide, Sean, if you could, we evolved and said, okay, we applied in June of 2018. It was now about July of 2019. And ultimately, we knew that we weren't getting where we needed to be with some of our items, so we said, all right, what if we approached this differently in working with the DNR, and we didn't totally change plans. We decided to dissect it, try to go and see if we couldn't get a small portion of it approved, which was the northern half, because we did have and do have interest from big box retailers, but ultimately we knew we weren't going to be able to get the whole thing approved at once. So we went back, we modified it, kept the two big boxes on the northern portion the way they are, and ultimately then said, all right, let's try to do a couple of other things now. There's a couple of key components that I want to highlight that are required even if we just did this northern half, okay? So as you can imagine, the northern half by itself does not generate enough increment. Still not something we're able to get approved through the DNR, but generates a lot of the same traffic volumes and other thing that's needed. So ultimately, as you take a look, we've laid out on the slide some just key bits and pieces of information. Ford Development Group has in excess of $2 million invested in the engineering, traffic impact analysis, wetlands-related work, land control, interest carry, a bunch of things that we can demonstrate every dollar. Okay. The village has probably equal to or more dollars than that.
3.2 million.
Pardon me?
3.2 million.
3.2 million.
But the village has also paid for traffic impact analysis, so I'm not sure where the traffic impact analysis comes from FTG.
So well, we would have our JSD, who is our engineers, guide those things and get involved in providing details based on the concept plan. So even with a third-party consultant that's involved, we incur considerable cost to guide those efforts, to provide information to them, to analyze results, as concept plans change, to then provide more information. So all of that has involvement by us in some way, shape, or form. So also, to move forward, you have significant infrastructure costs. So we just have highlighted a whole bunch of things that are lined up and have been incurred, need to be incurred. Land control, the current land control status is on hold. We can't continue to maintain land control if we don't have a date upon which we'll get approvals. It's been almost 4 years since we've had our initial land control. We know that the gas line relocation, ATC relocations have been put on hold until we know what needs to be done, but many costs were incurred by the village in regards to that. So all of those items that were moving forward in order to be able to ultimately get this project in line with the original estimates are sitting waiting for this wetland permit to be issued. Okay.
Quick question, Keith. How much has the village spent on this project? 3.2 total? Okay, thank you.
There's, that includes the 2.6 million borrowed relative to the utility relocation.
Okay.
So we'd be seeking probably a reimbursement on that.
Okay.
Or I guess a cease of the effort, depending on how things go, potentially.
And keep in mind, depending on the future and what happens, eventually, it doesn't mean that those costs aren't going to be able to be taken advantage of in some way, shape, or form. But at this point in time, there's no reason to incur significantly greater dollars based on where we're at with the wetland permit. So this slide is just to let you know there's been a lot of, this time, effort, energy, cost, ideas. These, as we originally visualized it, Justin could speak to this probably even better than I could, but, concept plan like this in the right-hand part of your screen. In a normal development, we may do 3 to 5 iterations to try to figure out how something could work and how we can get it to move through entitlements and all its approvals. If we have one concept plan, we have in excess of 50 that we've designed and redesigned and tried to find ways to make things work. But ultimately, then, as we came in July and then moved through September and are trying to just get this one piece approved so that we could get it started, we've basically got to the point where we are unable to even get that approved for a variety of reasons, and we ultimately even submitted a proposed developers agreement in January because that was the last thing that the DNR had requested, and ultimately that's part and parcel of where we came to this conclusion that it just doesn't make sense at this point for it to move forward as it currently exists. So with that overview, then I'll have Justin step to the podium here and talk with you about some of the details of the permit that we've been trying to obtain and where that currently sits at this point in time. So Justin, if you could do that.
Good evening, Justin Frame, project consultant with JSD, address 7402 Stone Ridge Drive, Weston. As Ron mentioned, the number of logistical constraints related to the overall project, I'm here to discuss specifically the efforts our firm was tasked with in developing the individual permit and the technical constraints of the permit, or technical requirements of the permit, kind of where we started, a couple of the key factors related to the wetland permit, and where we're at today. As Ron mentioned, in June of 18, we had consensus on the plan, on the neighborhood plan, relative to the southeast quadrant. That began to form the basis of the initial permit, and was the initial submittal. So a number of planning, engineering, technical related items went into that permit in July of 2018 when we started. We had a number of subsequent requests immediately after that from the DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers that we addressed throughout the course of summer and fall of 18. In early 2019, there was additional legislation put forth in the state of Wisconsin that reformatted the artificial wetland exemption process. Artificial wetlands can be created by a number of factors, ponds, construction on site, utility corridors, a number of factors that were more clearly defined in the state legislation as of winter of 2019. At that time, we looked at our site relative to the new legislation. So one of the key factors of our site was in 2010 and 2015, there were wetland delineations done on site that had a portion of the wetlands that are on site today. From 2015 to 2018, when we made our submittal with the individual permit, those wetlands had grown. Those wetlands had grown by virtue of the principal wetland area, as well as what the DNR terms mosaic wetlands, which are upland, lowland, combinations of wetlands, and are a percentage of wetlands for those areas. That tied into our artificial wetland exemption request. So at that time, the project team, the village got together and said, this could help the project in reducing the amount of wetlands on site. So from fall of 18 into spring of 19, we submitted an artificial wetland exemption request. We were hopeful that that would reduce wetlands by way of some of the utility corridors that were on site. In the 7 to 10 acre range is what was being requested. You'll see in March of 19, we actually got about 2.5 acres exempted, which was much less than what we were hoping for. We went back to the DNR and immediately after that, after the initial granting of the artificial wetland exemptions, and we requested more based on our site analysis and what we felt was the artificial wetlands on site. And in April of 2019, when they were able to make a site visit, those wetlands exempted went from 2.5 acres to 3.69 acres. So it reduced wetlands on site a little over 3.5 acres at that time. That was spring of last year. At that time, the DNR and the Army Corps requested us to update our permit materials relative to the artificial wetland exemption so that the numbers of impacts were reflective of what the new artificial wetland total was. We had done that with village staff and the project team. We made some project changes, as Ron had mentioned, that looked at reducing infrastructure impacts, looked at reducing site impacts relative to the north half of the permit area we were defining. And that brought us to July and August of last year. So in August of last year, we had requested the DNR re-engage the permit. We put forth the plan that you see on the screen with the artificial wetland exemption and all updated information. To give you an idea, the initial wetland impact back in July of 18 was between 15 and 20 acres of impact on site. By virtue of the artificial wetland exemption as well as other planning and infrastructure changes, back in July of last year, we got that down into the 7 to 10 acre range of total impact. At that time, the DNR had additional requests for infrastructure reductions, stormwater management, engineering related to the project to try to further minimize impact. And last year, in September of 19, we received those additional requests. We responded to those between September and December of 19, so just a few months ago, and our latest submittal was in December of 19. So that last amendment took us from October to the end of December for our submittal efforts responding to those additional supplemental requests. Depending on the option, and there's a couple of options relative to the site placement and the infrastructure, we've gotten that impact down into the 4 to 5 acre wetland impact range, which we feel is suitable, and certainly a good portion of those impacts relate to infrastructure. So the red street A that you can see is about half of those impacts, so about 2.5 acres in that location, and then about 2.5 acres for the site itself. So a significant reduction from where we started to where we were at here as of December 19. In January of 20, So last month, about a month and a half ago, we received additional supplemental requests from the DNR that included additional planning considerations as well as some logistical constraints of the permit, which involved contracts for those end users. Those contracts were requested relative to having those users set and lands purchased, sites purchased for those pad locations. And there is also an additional logistical constraint from the real estate process, which Ron can speak to. A few other of the considerations within the DNR latest request was, can you place the retailers in a different location on site? And certainly there's technical constraints and logistical constraints to moving those retailers on site, say putting them in the southeast quadrant behind significant vegetation and trees where there's no visibility and access and wayfinding. Those are a number of the technical items left in the permit process. A lot of the technical engineering, infrastructure, the stormwater management, the planning considerations, the clearing, vegetation clearing for visibility, which you can see in yellow on screen, have all been addressed. So that was our latest effort to bring us to this point. In February, I believe February 2nd, after receiving the additional supplemental request, the village had directed JSD to place the IP on hold until the discussion on the end users, the contractual agreements being requested by the DNR were discussed and vetted with the village and the agreements being discussed, the developers agreement, the additional retailer agreements that would be required of the DNR to move forward. So that's in a snapshot the rough 18 to 20 months of the permit process and some of the technical constraints we've been met with. I think certainly the reduction of wetland impacts from 18 to 20 acres down to 4 to 5 acres is substantial. However, the mitigation component of the process is still pending within the wetland permit process at this point. To give you an idea of the individual permit, some of you may know the individual permit is greater than 10,000 square feet of impact versus a general permit, which is less than that. An individual permit typically takes 90 to 120 days, so 3 to 4 months. It would give you an idea, depending on a public hearing, whether a public hearing is called by any respective public party at that point or not. So we've gone beyond that, obviously, and there are some constraints and challenges to next steps to request the public hearing. One of those factors being the retail contracts for, obviously that kind of creates a chicken and egg scenario where users aren't purchasing lands that they don't have a high level, high degree of confidence that the permit is in hand such that they can build the product in the site plan that we've developed prior to signing contractual agreements. So before I give it back to Ron, I wanted to go through kind of where we started, where we're at today, and what that last amendment, the last agenda item, took us from with the latest submittal. Are there any questions related to the process of the wetland individual permit that any of you may have? Yeah, Hushain.
So DNR never got the name of the user, because that was one of their hold up practically, and they want to know who's going to be in those, who's going to be the tenant.
Yep.
Did they get those names at all, or it didn't happen?
Yeah, so they requested additional information on the site plan of the tenant, and that's where what we've provided them. So number of parking stalls, square footage, but they have not been given the actual name of the tenant relative to the contractual agreements for those end users coming on board with the developer.
But they do have a confidentiality procedure. You can use that and submit the name to them. It is in the statute.
Right.
That, why didn't we go that direction?
We did look at that. We looked at that with Village Council as well as Developers Council. That remains a potential option. We've gotten word back from the DNR legal counsel that the confidentiality agreement will only take them so far. Prior to getting a public hearing, they want that signed contract with that user, which therein lies a challenge. Other wetland permits we've been a part of, the site plan and the site plan needs, so the actual critical functional needs of the site plan are what get reviewed at the DNR agency level. Because as you look at that big box, there are 3 to 4 users that are pretty consistent with that big box, right? So that therein lies a bit of a gray area that we've never gotten a great answer from the DNR as to whether or not the confidentiality agreement can bridge that. Our latest request is please provide signed contracts.
So, but maybe that question is for Ron. Do they have the control of the land? Do they have did they purchase the land, or maybe Ron can answer that question?
Yeah, I'll allow Ron, because they've been working on
Okay.
that component
Okay.
of it, so.
Thank you. So your public hearing is pending on submitting the name of the user?
Correct.
If I understand right.
In addition to some additional technical items, but that is one of the logistical constraints we're met with right now.
Okay.
Yes. Any additional questions? All right, if you have any questions, I will be available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. I'll answer that
Sure.
question for you.
Please.
They're not looking for the name of the user. We are concerned whether or not the confidentiality would ultimately be an issue because we haven't looked at that section. They are looking for a contract with the user, and that is something that we are unable to provide. We do not have one in the users, and this is something that we've communicated, I'm going to say, well over a year ago, is that we cannot, the users will not sign any LOIs or purchase agreements until we resolve this wetland fill issue. They have a specific way that they go about developing and committing to future sites, and they will not commit to a site if there are any issues as it relates to their ability for us to move forward and make it a pad-ready site. So that's why we've been trying to get a permit issued on an overall site plan basis, not both the individual site and the larger site, and have been unable to do so.
Maybe they can provide a letter of intent. That letter of intent, then, there is no binding in there. They can write it in that fashion and satisfy the DNR.
Understand, but they are looking for a contract that is more than a letter of intent, because a letter of intent has no, legal, doesn't carry any legal substance to it. So we've researched each and every avenue and angle that we can take to try to get this thing done, and using both your legal counsel, our legal counsel, third-party consultants, and have been unable to be able to satisfy what the DNR is asking us to do.
But where is if you look at the map up there, and if we just stick with the amount of mitigation that the DNR allowed, what would you be able to do as far as development just based on that mitigation?
So what we've been working on to answer that question, we've been working on the current, and let me review it because there's an important piece of that. So we've tried to scale it back and just get approval on this current piece since the fall of 2019. Now, because we're working to find an avenue that we can maybe guide this through. Now, when that, once this was done, we put a pro forma together relating to this piece, okay? And that pro forma was provided to your third-party consultant, Ellers, in the October timeframe. I could give you a specific date, but it was sometime in the fall, okay? Now, when I, as the CFO at Forward Development Group, developed that pro forma to send in, because it's one thing to say, let's move on this small little piece. It's another thing for that small little piece to be economically viable. So we provided the information and gave Ellers an opportunity to weigh in on it. And that was then why we ultimately scheduled a meeting with Keith and the village staff in December, is that as we took a look at that pro forma, the TIF request, as you can see, was 10.7 million for the on-site TIF need. Now, Sean, if you could go back to the full planned one, because it will be a visual for us. So you can see for that whole plan and all of that increment, the TIF need was $9 million, okay? For the on-site, there was off-site needs. Now, you go back to the slide that, so for just those two big boxes, it's 10.7 million as well. Now, they don't generate very much increment. So if you take a look at affordability, the pro forma indicated that these two big boxes could only support 4 million in TIF. Okay, so the whole area could support 10.7 million in on-site TIF. When you go to these two big boxes, they could only support 4 million. So the village then, if you said, okay guys, go forward with this, would have to come up with 6.7 million within the tax increment district to make it work.
So so you can't have three big boxes under the current DNR ruling on how much mitigation you need.
Yeah, it doesn't work then
Doesn't
economically,
work.
right?
No,
So
no,
then
but I
they
mean-
came back, there's a
Physically.
third one that they then came
Physically.
back and said, well, forget about two, because we don't want to mitigate, move two down to the southeast quadrant, and, well, that doesn't, I mean, doesn't work any better than this one that doesn't work, but it's also not feasible to sell that to a user. So we get back to, that's why I started with the vision and the concept of where you're at. As they started now, the DNR, to say, well, what about that, what about this, to try to help all of us, it doesn't work economically either. So we're going down an avenue that's just causing everyone to spend more dollars. But it's not going to ultimately result in any viable project. So that's what's happening as we keep trying to piecemeal it, and then pretty soon you don't have any ability, because then a community, the way I talked about in the original vision, so we're just getting each and every day further and further away from a viable project.
Well, I guess I'm still not quite clear. I mean, you can't do the same development by moving things around because there's just too much wetland?
Correct.
And how much more do you need to reduce it in order to be able to do the full project? The wetland area.
Well, right now, we don't even have approval, we don't have any approvals right now. We've tried to move around and figure out, and as Justin has explained, we've gotten some reduction in areas and we've made progress and we've made gain, but right now, we don't have any. And Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any indication that approval's gonna get us even close to the project that we, have
I think I
started.
can help with that. We started in that 18 to 20 acre range. We got down to that 7 to 10 range, and now we're down to that 4 to 5 acre range. When we've very frankly asked the DNR, what's the number that would be allowable? And the two keys were to reduce the site pad areas and reduce infrastructure, stormwater, roads. So if you wouldn't mind going back a slide, right, that one forward, please. That one. So the red area is impact. So you can
see it split about 50-50. While they weren't able to give us what the exact number is relative to an acceptable amount, two notes are, it still would be one of the largest wetland fill permits in the history of the state of Wisconsin at 4.5 to 5 acres. We feel we got to a point that Street A, the infrastructure area, was acceptable. And we got, I don't want to say buy-in because there really wasn't a permit ever issued, but we got discussion that Street A, after the changes we made from July of last year till now, was reduced to a point that was probably at its minimized impact at the 2.5 acres for Street A. So then it leaves the sites. What is acceptable for the sites, and really from a technical standard standpoint, Lot 1, or big box 1 we'll call it, has a fairly limited impact to the north for stormwater. That, in my mind, would be perhaps the most minimized location we could get on site for one store. But as Ron mentioned, as we go down to one store, that, if we're not feasible at 2 stores, we obviously wouldn't be feasible at 1 store. So we did a number of what's called practical alternatives analysis, and I know I'm digressing a bit, but it shows so we put one in the east corner, or excuse me, the west corner and the southeast corner, which got that pad site or the retail sites down in the 1 to 3 acre range, any way you kind of move them on site. So we feel we're at a point with 2 stores that this is the most efficient and the least impactful option that is still feasible from a viability standpoint for retail. Obviously, putting it in the southeast quadrant behind trees without access is just really a non-starter. So hopefully that helped break down the impacts between Street A, which we feel the agencies are largely comfortable with, but then it comes down to how many pad sites you get. And right now we feel that we're at the most efficient option here too, which still has technical challenges.
And I just emphasize the on-site costs. So currently at the level that we're at, there's not enough increment being generated to cover the on-site costs, but there would also need to be off-site costs. Now they're at 12.5 million now, not at 27 million, because as you make things smaller, you have less traffic, you don't need as large intersections, turn lanes, signalization, other things, so everything comes down, but at the same time, you also then are losing increment, affordability, other things, so based on that, and our knowledge of the situation, the work that everybody's done, we're not able to see a path at the moment that's going to get to where it needs to be in order to continue to spend dollars to move forward. And even though Justin has said we've got these reduced in these areas, that is correct, but we don't have our final approvals. There's been no public hearing. There's been no further work that goes beyond that to determine, to guarantee that that's where it's going to ultimately land. No different than when you come in with entitlements and think you've got things figured out and have a public hearing, things change and tweak and you know, just can't say with any confidence that it will get better than that, but it's more than likely that it could get worse.
So what happened between November and December that made you realize that this was a bad idea?
Well, it didn't, what happened between November and December, first of all, time needed to be incurred by your outside consultant to review and weigh in on what was provided, which that, you know, occurred during those months to understand, assimilate, make sure that they could ask questions and determine whether or not our pro formas were realistic and challenge them. So that's one thing. But ultimately, what created the largest issue from our perspective was when the DNR came back and said, the next thing that we need is a development agreement that's entered into between the developer and the village of Weston. And so as additional requests came in, like that one, it continues to be more problematic to enter into a development agreement when you don't have all of your zoning, entitlement, uses, construction drawings, stormwater, other things figured out is something that is unusual. So at that point in time, when that request came in, as we're waiting for a little additional information and feedback, we said it's time to connect and talk through what might be the best way to move forward.
Okay. And when did you first get an inkling that this might not come into play?
That what might not.
Or, I'm sorry, that this may not develop the way that, that we had hoped?
Well, it was in the end of the third quarter, fourth quarter of 2019 when this scenario then came to us from the, you know, as we progressed down a path and we're communicating, negotiating with the DNR, and this scenario came through and said, let's model this scenario, see, and I'd have to look at the date of it, it was October something or September something, is when things started to then become out of balance from an economic standpoint.
Can you refresh my memory? When did you first contact staff that this project is not going to go through as it was originally planned?
Well, we've been discussing all along issues with the project, so we can go back and talk about a number of those things, but it was in December at some point in time. I can tell you, I know the day of the meeting, it was on a Monday before Christmas, so what was that day there? It was December
23rd.
December 23rd was when we actually met with staff and said, you know, based on where we're sitting and what we're doing, here's, you know, at least our thoughts, what are you thinking, what is your feedback? And that was when we connected with staff and said, it's time to start to look at this
Ron,
different.
I gotta jump in here because I'm hearing something that's different than what my whole take on this was. We've been trying to get a meeting with FTG. I can think back a year ago, I talked to Dave Jenkins with my concern about how the thing was going, and we never got you guys here to talk to you. Now, we did meet with you in December, and yes, it was at that point, there was an admission that the pro forma that was presented did not work. And I agree with that. I think the staff here realized that. I think our consultant realized it. They said there should be more participation, more skin in the game, if you will, from FTG's perspective. So we're at the point, I guess, I think we're covering old ground here, but this isn't a case of, I ever heard from FTG that they said that this wasn't gonna work. That never was discussed. Not until recently.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm not gonna debate that here.
I want to be very, very clear about that point, because that's one of the very first things you said tonight, was that in December, you told staff that this will not be, we should not be moving forward. So you did make that comment tonight.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But this entire board never heard that.
I was just going to say that.
And
I was
if
just
that
going
would
to
have
make
been
the
said,
comment.
I mean, I talk to Keith almost daily. I'd be shocked that Keith wouldn't have told us that that's what you said. Because what I've been hearing at this level is that we've been trying to get a meeting.
Added to that, you just said, when I asked you, that in October, you began to get an inkling that this was a bad idea, not going to work out.
Can I also add that I was getting the impression that it was going to work out, you know, that there was just more information that needed to be brought up, and now I'm hearing something completely different from what I was being, in a sense here, led on. And I guess, to be very frank and honest, I'm a little disappointed. I'm very disappointed at what I'm hearing now, and I feel like this is the first time I'm hearing something along this line here.
The think we were
Appreciate
always.
that. I wanna comment.
Okay.
We could go back and provide you with the day-by-day of what was communicated if you would like us to do that. Just, there's a series of events that led up to, as we're continually trying to work to see that we could find an avenue, there were numerous discussions that we had with staff throughout the process that I could point to and talk about things that needed to change in the pro formas in order for it to work properly. We can talk about all of those in some other forum, okay? But we had discussions even in the second quarter of 2019 relating to land prices in relation to the changes. And we brainstormed on what needed to be done. All along, we talked about where there were weaknesses within the financials and things that we needed to deal with and to try to improve them. So we can, at some other time, go into the information and the avenue of what brought us to that conclusion. But ultimately, what I said to you is that at that point in time, we said, okay, with the direction and all of the information we have, a decision has to be made to say, we should not go down this avenue any longer. And that's what we then communicated in December. It doesn't mean there weren't a lot of events that led to that point in time. Now, anything in between could have changed, and the DNR could have come back and said, hey, you've given us information where all of the wetlands could be mitigated. It would go back and change the concept plan. So we're all working toward a goal, but we got to the point when we just continued to provide information, and they asked for more information, and then more information, and things that we couldn't provide, that we said, you know, gang, for your benefit and ours, it doesn't make sense to continue to go down this avenue.
I think the last I heard was we were gonna hold the public hearing. I don't understand really. We talked about a public hearing. Why we were talking about public hearing?
We felt the commitment, I think, from the conditions in the memorandum of understanding. I know
Right.
You and I had talked about this as well.
Yes, yep.
That we should at least get to the point of knowing what the answer is gonna be on an individual permit. And I think both parties came to the realization it was not gonna happen. And I guess the long and the short of this whole discussion tonight is, I think we're both on the same page there. We're not gonna get a wetland fill permit. We're not gonna get a wetland mitigation permit for the retail portion of this project. Correct? I mean,
Correct.
That's really the long and the short of this whole discussion.
Correct.
And yes, we've done some pro formas, tried to look at some pro formas, but there's never been enough detail to know if we can analyze those to the great detail that's needed for a development agreement. Would you agree?
The pro formas that we have completed and they're provided to the Ellers are the same ones that we provide in every community. The detail is there for them to analyze. If we don't provide that to you, because it becomes public record, so they review it and then report back to you. So we've given them all of the detail as it relates to everything, revenue, cost, concept plans, everything that is needed. So it's been there. We have just never been able to, based on the wetlands fill permit, to land on a pro forma that we can execute. It just
Right.
keeps changing.
It was there in late September and then early October. And then again, we had to get an answer on the wetland permit. So hearing though that your assessment was the project couldn't go forward did not occur until December. That's when
That's correct.
That's when we were both on the side. I think we're on the same page. I think in terms of what we were communicating with the board, some of this was, it was all in flux, I suppose, would be a way to.
I mean, the best way I can explain it is that, and I'm not, I believe we communicated to you as soon as we said, based on what's happening, it's not to your benefit or ours to spend another dollar. We don't, as a developer, we don't have the information you have to, let's say that 2 big boxes, as I said, could generate $4.5 million in tax revenues to pay off any type of borrowing related to the project. You're in a very large tax increment district. We don't know what's happening in the rest of the district for you to say, hey, you know what? We've got ability to fund the remainder and we want to move this forward. And so therefore, we're going to incur that borrowing in order to move this forward. We've had municipalities do that. It's not our responsibility to determine what you want to do within your district. So when that information that was sent to Ellers in September, October showed that there was that gap, they need to analyze that. They need to talk with you and determine whether or not it makes sense to move something forward based on that gap. That's not our responsibility. We identified it and said, okay, so then when the DNR asked for more information and you could see that it was going a certain direction is when we said, you know, there's more than enough information here for us to sit down and say, this project should not move forward. And that's what we did. Now, let me go through a few more slides. I'll answer all of your questions to the best of my ability. So let's go to current status. Okay, so basically, like I had indicated, there's always one thing leads to another. So, you know, basically here's where we're at. We need to do something different. I pulled a quote out, you know, everybody thinks that current day knowledge and everything with what's happening in the world today, that old adages and statements don't make sense anymore, but I'm going to read one from Albert Einstein. It's one that I use in strategic planning a lot, and it says, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. And that's where we're at right now. We can continue to go down that path and say, we created this vision, working with you guys 5 years ago, that we want this retail center. And no matter how hard we push and try, we're not going to get there. We need to think different. And we need to adapt. And that's what this slide here is saying. We can go down that same path, and we can have that public hearing, and we can do anything that you would like us to do. It isn't going to change the end result, so we need to change something else. We need to adapt. So the wetland impacts, we think we're at an impasse. That's not going to happen. The reduced acreage for development is a problem that has been generated as a result of the inability to have the entire area developed. The infrastructure costs are extraordinary, and based on the development changing, the land costs cannot be supported at this point in time. Now you combine that with the last item on there, the changing retail landscape. And we all know what that is. The expansion is not occurring in retail the way it was in 2015, and we can wish that it was that way. But it's not, and as each day goes by, it changes further, and the main organization that has created that change is Amazon, which we all know what's happening on a daily basis. So if you came to us today, not back in 2013 and 2014, but you came to us today and you said, hey, we've got this tax increment district and we want a regional center, because that is what you came to us with. You had done the study, Retail Center did the study, and you said, we want this out there. What would we tell you today? Don't do it. You're not going to be able to support that much retail. It's changing too fast. We didn't have that information 5 years ago. It doesn't mean that we can't get those 2 big boxes. We have one that's interested and it says, you know, you get this figured out, we'll come here. We can potentially carry out pieces of this plan, but it doesn't mean that the entire vision's going to work the way that was originally planned. So for the good of the development in the community, it makes sense that the plan be changed. We can't continue to look at it the same way. Now, that doesn't, FTG as the developer isn't giving up. We're vested in this, just like you are. We actually think you've been, you know, an excellent partner in trying to figure it out. But we got to work at this together. The current plan doesn't it? Now, we have some ideas on what we can do with the information that's been generated from both parties, how we could proceed, and we're looking and wanting to further those ideas and come back to you sometime in the next 60 to 90 days. So I know everybody's not pleased. Doesn't mean that we're giving up. Doesn't mean that we're a bad developer. Doesn't mean that good decisions throughout the process haven't been made. But we need to make a good one now too. And we recommend taking a different path. So what might that path be? You know, right now, there's many asset classes there. Retail is a challenge right now. But there's other, what we call asset classes. There's other commercial opportunities and office opportunities and hospitality opportunities and multifamily opportunities and residential opportunities and single-family opportunities. And those are all opportunities that we believe should be explored within the village here. So we haven't explored all of them, so we have actually are commissioning a number of different market studies to help us. Some research we do internally, some we work with third parties on. So when we last met with staff in January, we said, give us 15 to 20 days to see if what we're thinking might make sense. We have some ideas, and we've shared some of those preliminary ideas with staff, but we need to do more work. So we're going to do that work. We should have those studies complete in mid-April or something like that. We need to sort through what we learned from them. And we're going to work to create a new vision, whether it be for this project or elsewhere within the village. We've got a lot of excellent reasons, both land and other needs within the community that we want to explore. And we're going to work to do that. And we'll come back with you, we'll share our findings, we'll meet with staff and say, hey, here's our thoughts and ideas and how we think it might benefit the village. And of course, then also ourselves and how it can be what was a positive relationship that hasn't gone exactly the way that any of us had anticipated, but make it something that is a positive and fruitful relationship again. So that's what our plan is, and hopefully, even though things haven't worked the way any of us wanted, that you still would believe that we're a good developer trying to do good things in your community and trying to find a way that we can, create a win-win for both the village and ourselves. So with that, is there any other thoughts, ideas, questions that you have?
Going forward from here, at what cost? Because you understand we spent a lot of money so far and we got nothing to show for it, actually. Going forward, it has to be understanding what cost, and also, I don't believe we can go forward without an agreement, developer agreement. That developer agreement should identify exactly what's in there. You can come back with your plan. I'm speaking for myself. I can't speak for everybody sitting in here, but you can come back with your option. We take a look at it. But those are the issues. We have to take a look at it also.
So are you talking with this new vision, this new path, this change, and get back to us the next month or two, that would all be on you to develop that and then come back and present?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. I'm just reading this last slide here, and 2 years ago I got elected. and that's the last time I saw your group here, is the month after I was on. It's just a shame to have the largest thing we've ever done here, the largest thing that was ever tried to do here. I believe it's bigger than the hospital, sure it is. And to have you have on there, reconnect with the village staff and board. That's a shame, it really is. It's disappointing to see reconnect. And 18 is when I've sat here at board night when Keith has said, we're trying to get a meeting, we're trying to get a meeting, we're trying to get a meeting. And I know sometimes their phone and their conference calls and stuff, but boy, it's a shame that now at this point, we're all here. It doesn't need, you don't need to have a comment back, but I would hope that the word reconnect doesn't have to be used again.
Yeah.
That if we're gonna move forward, and if you actually, I know what a partner is. I deal out with a lot of customers, and a partner to me, boy, you're a partner thick and thin the whole way. And I don't feel that way about our partnership in the last almost 2 years. I'm running for election in first part of April. We'll see what happens, but I would sure hope that this relationship and these meetings face-to-face is a big deal. Big deal. Now, and when you said, I want to make sure I understand this, because we have a past board member here, staff is all here, Husheng is here, and otherwise the four of us are new. When you said that this village came to you, is that truly how that happened?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Came to us, now, this is before my time.
Yep,
so
okay.
Similar to yourself, but I've been in that was Dave Jenkins and Dennis Steinkraus.
Okay.
Annually, we go to ICSC. It's a major retail show in Las Vegas.
So that's where I've heard some rumblings that's how the connection started.
It was in Chicago.
Or Chicago, I mean, okay,
ICSC
okay.
then. But was it still in ICSC?
It was at ICSC.
Yep, okay.
So-
Nothing more has to,
I
I just had some
told
time.
it was multiple times before we said yes. And, One
Okay.
of the challenges all along has been the wetlands piece.
Yep, yep.
I just want to echo what Trustee Maloney said. I was elected in April, and the number one concern that the constituents said is, when are we going to get any answers on this Camp Phillips Center project? And easily 8, 9 times. Keith said in board meetings that they were trying to get a meeting. In one of my previous jobs, a group came in and was working with a municipality. And it always felt like they were just trying to swindle the village out of money. And I can't help but feel some of that same frustration now. Showing up matters, and it didn't feel like a partnership. It felt like this big chore that we just had to deal with and get through. And I hope going forward that changes.
And I'll comment, your point well taken, as we tried to deal with the wetlands and it was working in the background, it was clear that we didn't do as good a job as we could have or should have.
Well, Trustee Feeney and I had a open doors meeting the other day, last week, 2 weeks ago. And even then when we were asked by our constituents about whether this was going to go through, the impression that I can't speak for Trustee Feeney, but on me, I actually felt that this project was still gonna go through But I'm, like I mentioned earlier, this is the first time where I'm actually hearing that this project's not gonna occur, or FDG's recommended this project's not going through. I don't recall hearing that at all from staff, and I don't know if any of my other fellow colleagues heard this from staff at all either. But I'm going back to what I said earlier. I sincerely felt like I was led on, and one of the things I dislike the most is being led on without a real answer, and then, in a sense here, being sideswiped out of nowhere. And that's how I'm truly feeling. And without a doubt, this is probably the most upset I've ever been regarding, and my whole entire time being involved with any in my elected roles.
Can I just follow up on that? And I think we were in a point with this project where we aren't telling the public. There was still a hope, I guess, there was gonna get a wetland mitigation permit.
Yeah.
We can't represent it any other way until we have an answer. And we didn't have an answer to that until recently. I think, and both parties realized that the wetland permit is not gonna be declared complete until we had that phone conference in our office, when was that, in December and January? I mean, this has been very recent where some of these things have finally come to a head. So I guess if we would have had to discuss these things in closed session, I couldn't have talked about this in open session. So I know we talked about bringing FDG here. There were times we tried to get them, and I think we couldn't get to for whatever reasons, but
Can I make
if
a
I had
comment?
a failing in any way in there, I guess I certainly
No.
wasn't intended, but, there's a certain amount that we can or can't say in public on this, I guess, until we got to a certain point, so that's.
I started being very careful with the public too. There's a family with the 40 acres out there that has called me for 2 years. And probably the last 6 times, I won't take his call. And I let Keith know that he called and he's gonna call him back, but, he would tell me about discussions with your group and I couldn't help him. I couldn't, and I only have power with 7 people. I'm only one voice, and I don't have that, with somebody on the phone. I can't help him. And so, I did, the first couple times, because he was concerned where being elected, am I gonna, come in here and try to dismantle this? I said, absolutely not. I think it's great if it goes. I was concerned on the wetlands too from the get-go. I was concerned in 15. I was talking to the past administrator about it with those wetlands and the retail in its, just brick and mortar in itself scared the hell out of me. So, anyway, Jen, I don't mean to take over
Well,
from you.
in this last
Wally.
aspect, I mean, we kept giving the DNR everything that they wanted, and then they would change. I mean, the feeling I felt at that last meeting, they said, oh, you don't have to give a name until the public hearing. Well, this last submission in December, it was like, no, we're not even gonna look at it until you give us that name. So we were always caught in this chicken and egg. It's like it's like if we said, I felt like if we said something, like gave them a name, that they would be okay. So it always seemed like they didn't understand master planning. That always bothered me. They wanted to piecemeal it. And they even said at one point, why don't you just ask for the road? Well, we're not gonna just build a road. We were trying to do it right. And there's still ways that the project could probably start on a smaller scale, and unfortunately, fortunately, I guess, but we would get the end result that we want, but they want us to piecemeal it. So we're gonna have to potentially start somewhere else in maybe an area that we wouldn't wanna normally do it. So it was a frustration as a planner, this whole
My
process.
frustration and disappointment with the DNR is bar none. But I don't think that even has to be said, and I probably shouldn't be saying it on camera. So for future development, but that is beyond me. I sometimes don't think we're in the same country.
Yeah.
So anyway.
If I just, I'm not defending DNR, but
I hope
just
not.
working with them, there are places in the state they approve it and nothing happening. And they didn't want to get cut the same place also.
Well, when I heard that Rhinelander, this is the biggest project Rhinelander's ever had, then why don't we go to Madison and let Madison handle it? If we have to train Rhinelander to do something this big, then why doesn't somebody that knows how to do this, has dealt with something this big, this large, let them do it? Why are we retraining a smaller group? It just didn't make sense to me, so.
Well, the thing is, they came around here, they took a look at it, and some of these wetland develop in there based on the construction of Highway 29.
I know.
All the water being discharged to that property.
Yep.
That created wetland. But it is difficult to convince him to change his mind. So here we are. I think we should just move on from here.
Move forward. Change is inevitable. Yep.
All right,
Can I comment on just a couple of things based on discussion? And I'm saying these not in our defense. When someone, I learned a long time ago, if a constituent, customer, partner doesn't think that you communicated well enough with them, then you probably haven't. So, a little bit of this is new territory for us. February 2015 to now is 5 years. I can tell you, we do not have one other development that has taken us 5 years to get it entitled. Secondly, with this 18-month period with the DNR and with your consultants, with JSD as an engineer, with attorneys that were hired, all of that, we're trying to figure things out and continue to send information. And as Jennifer had said, it was constantly changing. And so, sometimes it's harder to communicate when you don't know what to communicate. You just you're waiting for that piece of information, that piece of good news that you can take and say, hey, something happened here and it just never came. And so all of a sudden time goes by. And like I said, that's not an excuse. I just think that's what happened to us, I guess as our parting comment, don't give up on us. We're working hard to figure things out. We have shared some ideas with staff. I think Jennifer's correct. Things will find a way, whether they be within this site or other areas, that will cause the relationship, I believe, to be a fruitful one. So with that, thank you. Oh, I want to mention one other thing. I'm our CFO and Vice President of Operations. I get involved in all of our projects, but Dennis Steinkraus, who you know, is our entitlement person, and he had another commitment this evening, but I have a tendency to present things in more, maybe, hopefully understandable and factual way, so if I was a little short in saying, we'd suggest just not move forward, it's been after a lot of time, thinking, thoughtful ideas and stuff like that, and so hopefully I wasn't direct enough so you understood, but explained well enough so that you could understand the
You're
logic.
fine. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
okay. I don't know if there's really any action to be taken on this. I think it's been pretty clear from the presentation and from the way the financial aspects have been laid out that this is not a viable project. And I don't know if it's really necessary to say, obviously the retail component is not going to go forward, and I think it's important for the public to understand that. So I don't think we really need a motion on this. Obviously, if they come forward with a different proposal on a different project, obviously we'll vet that like we would any other project from any other developer. So, all right, with that, we will move on to item number, or back to item number 33, which we deferred, which is a contract amendment with JSD Professional Services for Camp Phillips Center wetland permit process.
I think, Keith, what's your feeling with that? What would you like to do? Let's put it, ask you that way.
I think based on our discussion and, I guess my feeling is that we should approve it up to the 29th, that month that they're requesting, because they haven't expended that effort. But I think regardless, whatever happens, that's something that we should be making them whole on, but, anything else going forward, I think we'd be determining that after they come back to us, whether it's 60, 90 days from now, or whatever.
Okay, move to approve it.
Second.
Motion by Zagami, second by Feeney. On the question. And that would, just to clarify, that would be to the amount of $29,750, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct, yes.
Okay, hearing nothing. On the question, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion carried.
All right, remarks from trustees. Nate, you have anything?
No.
Mark?
None.
No,
Anything?
thank you.
Yi?
No.
Remarks from president, I guess the only comment is, I would make is,
Wally, you skipped me, I'm still here. buddy.
oh, John, I'm sorry, you got it. It's always challenging when your smiling face isn't here.
Yeah, well, my smiling face will be there at the next meeting.
Okay. Do you have any comments, John?
I did not.
Okay. All right, I think we've touched on this enough. I think it's important that the public at least knows where we're at. I really struggled, even long before I was on the board with announcing this, putting this forward as this project and creating probably some false hopes. I think with any development, I'm sure there's challenges and stuff, and I'm sure Ron would probably echo that. No matter what you do, so the first plan, announcing this to the public was, I think, a mistake. And I think we need to be very careful as we look at developments. I think, we look at projects that are presented, vetted, and basically approved before we start announcing stuff like this and creating, I think, false expectations in the community. And that's my only comment. Future items. Next meeting is March 10th, 2020. This is a Board of Trustees and CDA meeting. We'll have attorneys there, I believe, to discuss the CDA roles and responsibilities and clear up some issues where we confuse different committees with what exactly they should be handling. March 16th, regular board meeting. April 6th, Board of Trustees regular meeting at 6 o'clock. Having consumed our agenda, are we looking for a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Nate.
Second.
Second by Mark. On the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 7:46 PM.
Just now.